Nobody tells you what silence sounds like inside a palace. People imagine it's grand, marble and chandeliers and the low murmur of history pressing against the walls. But real silence, the kind that falls after a doctor leaves a room and the door clicks shut behind him, sounds exactly the same in a palace as it does anywhere else. Small. Final. Like the last note of a song you didn't know you were listening to. January 2024 started the way most Januaries do in England, grey and cold, the kind of cold that settles into your coat before you've even stepped outside. The people of Britain had grown used to seeing Catherine, Princess of Wales, on their screens. Walking beside William. Laughing with children at some school somewhere. Her posture always perfect, her smile arriving exactly when it was needed, her coat always the right color for the occasion. She had become, without anyone quite planning it, the woman the country had decided to feel steady about. So when Kensington Palace issued that first statement, planned abdominal surgery, successful, expected to remain in hospital 10 to 14 days, most people nodded and set down their phones and thought, she'll be back by Easter. They didn't notice what the statement didn't say. Inside the London clinic, the days had a different texture entirely. The ceiling tiles were white. Unremarkable. The kind of ceiling you only memorize when you have too much time and not enough to do with it. Catherine, 42 years old, mother of 3, future Queen of England, had learned every crack in those tiles in the first 48 hours. William came every day. He didn't make a show of it. No announcement, no cameras, just a man driving himself to a hospital to sit with his wife. She'd watch him come through the door and something in his face, the specific way he arranged his features into calm, would tell her everything about how frightened he was. He was extraordinarily good at not looking frightened. It was one of the things she loved about him. It was also one of the things that made her feel most alone. "You look better today," he said on the third morning. She looked at him. "Don't," she said. He sat down. He took her hand. He didn't say anything else for a while, and that was actually better. Her parents had called. Her brother James. Her mother Carol, who had always known exactly what to say and who said nothing useful now either, but whose voice on the phone was like a warm room after standing too long in the cold. Catherine had held the phone against her ear long after the call ended. Just holding the warmth of it. Outside, 14 floors below, London carried on without her. Buses. Pigeons. Someone selling coffee from a cart on the corner. The world's extraordinary indifference to the fact that things were happening in this room. The children were at home in Windsor with the staff. George was 12 and, too observant by half, he would be watching, cataloguing, filing away details with that quiet precision he'd inherited from somewhere neither she nor William could quite identify. Charlotte would be managing Louis. Louis would be making everything worse and better simultaneously in the way only a 6-year-old can. She missed them so ferociously it sat in her sternum like a stone. 13 days after the surgery, she went home. The palace released a statement. Making good progress. Huge thanks to the nursing staff. Careful words. True words. But words that held a door shut. Because 3 days before she left the London clinic, they had told her. The surgeon had come in with that specific arrangement of professional gentleness that doctors practice until it becomes second nature, and he had sat down across from her, and William had held her hand so tightly she felt the bones of her fingers, and the doctor had said the word that rearranges everything. Cancer. Discovered in the tissue removed during surgery. Unexpected. They would need to proceed with preventative chemotherapy. They would need to begin soon. She'd heard it from a distance, like someone describing a storm that had already started. She looked at the ceiling tiles while the doctor spoke. Same ceiling tiles. Unremarkable. White. This is happening to me, she thought. Not to a princess. Not to a future queen. To me. Catherine. Who used to ride horses bareback across fields in Berkshire. Who burned toast on Sunday mornings and laughed about it. Who read to her children in different voices for different characters and couldn't do the dragon voice right no matter how many times she tried. To me. William's hand tightened. She turned and looked at him, and, for just a moment, half a second, maybe less, he let her see it. The fear. Real and enormous and exactly the same size as hers. Then, it was gone. His face rearranged. She loved him so much she couldn't speak. They didn't tell the public for another 6 weeks. 6 weeks of school runs and pretending and careful smiles at the window and William standing in front of rooms full of people talking about air ambulances or housing policy or something, while underneath it all this thing ran between them like a current. Silent. Constant. Theirs. She would sit at the kitchen table in the evenings after the children were in bed and watch the garden go dark, and she would think about what it meant to be a person who had a body that had turned on itself without warning, and she would think about George and Charlotte and Louis upstairs in their beds, and then she would stop thinking entirely for a while because some thoughts have no bottom. William would find her there. He never said, "You should go to bed." He would just make tea, without asking, and put a cup in front of her, and sit down across the table, and sometimes they'd talk and sometimes they wouldn't, and the silence in those moments was nothing like the silence when the doctor left the room. That silence had been final. This silence was the two of them, together, in it. When she told the world on that March afternoon, she sat in front of a camera in a garden and she spoke to her phone and she was, visibly and undeniably, a woman who had had a hard few months. Not the composed figure they expected. Not the managed image. Horror. This came as a huge shock, she said. William and I have been doing everything we can to process and manage this privately for the sake of our young family. People watched on their phones, on their laptops, in offices and kitchens and on buses. And something happened that nobody quite anticipated. The country, which had spent 6 weeks spinning wild theories about where she was and what was wrong the internet had been, to put it mildly, not its best self, went very quiet. Because she was just a woman. Sitting in a garden. Scared. Telling them the truth. The chemotherapy started. There is no graceful way to go through chemotherapy. It does not care about titles or schedules or the particular dignity you've spent a lifetime building. It arrives like a houseguest who rearranges all your furniture and, then, sits in your best chair. Catherine had spent her adult life learning how to perform being well. How to step out of a car and walk into a room and make everyone in that room feel seen. It was a skill she developed slowly and carefully, the way you learn any real skill, through practice, through failure, through the gradual accumulation of understanding. Chemotherapy didn't take that skill away. But it made it heavier. She talked about good days and bad days. On the bad days you feel weak, tired, and you have to give in to your body resting. She'd written that herself. Every word of it considered and genuine, the way she'd always done things. On the bad days she lay in the bedroom at Adelaide Cottage and listened to the rain and thought about nothing she wanted to think about. On the good days she was in the garden, in the light, doing exactly what she'd told a patient she'd do later. Getting the sun. Drinking water. Staying alive. George had started asking questions she didn't know how to answer. Not about the cancer specifically, they talked about that, carefully, age-appropriately, in the way that felt truthful without being devastating. He'd asked something simpler and harder, "Are you going to be okay?" She'd looked at him. This boy who watched everything. "I'm going to do everything I possibly can," she said. It was the truest answer she had. He seemed to understand that it was the only answer there was, and he nodded, and went back to his book, and she'd had to leave the room for a moment. Summer came the way summers do in England, tentatively, like it wasn't sure it was allowed. She appeared at Trooping the Colour in June. Thin. Holding herself carefully. Smiling in the way that meant she was working hard to smile. But, there. Outside. In the light and the noise and the pomp of it, with her 3 children around her like anchors. The crowd had cheered and she'd had to blink more than usual. The internet, which had been wrong about everything, spectacularly, with great confidence, said she looked wonderful. Then, it said she looked too thin. Then, it said the photograph at Easter had been edited. She had stopped reading the internet around February. William had gently suggested it. She had agreed more gently than she felt about it. She'd always had that gift, feeling one thing, deploying another. It had served the role well. Right now she wasn't sure it was serving her. In September, she walked through the countryside with William and the 3 children, and she filmed herself doing it, and she told the people who had been watching and waiting, as the summer comes to an end, I cannot tell you what a relief it is to have finally completed my chemotherapy treatment. Relief was exactly the right word. The most insufficient right word she could have chosen. She didn't say what it had cost. She didn't say about the mornings she'd stood in front of the mirror and not quite recognized the person looking back. She didn't say about the specific grief of losing her hair slowly and, privately, watching it go, the small vanity in the context of everything else, and yet. She didn't say about William, who had been extraordinary in ways she'd have no public language forever. She said, the last 9 months have been incredibly tough for us as a family. Past tense. Done. Moving forward. She was trying to mean it. January 14, 2025. 1 year, almost exactly, from the surgery that started all of this. She walked back into the Royal Marsden Hospital. Not as a patient this time. As a patron. As herself. The corridors were the same corridors. The particular smell of a hospital antiseptic and industrial cleaner, and, underneath both of those, something else, something harder to name. She knew this place in her body. The way you know any place you've been frightened in. Not a bad knowing. Just a true one. She sat with a woman who was partway through chemotherapy and who looked at Catherine the way people look at someone who's been where you are and come out the other side. It's really tough, Catherine said. Not a public statement. Not a press release. Just the truth, quietly, to someone who needed to hear it from someone who knew. It's such a shock. The woman nodded. Her hands in her lap. Everyone told me to keep a positive mindset, Catherine continued. It genuinely makes a difference. And, get outside as much as you can. Sunday water. Whatever your body asks for. Simple advice. The hardest kind. The kind you only believe when someone says it who's earned the right to say it. That same day, she posted on social media. She'd written it herself. The words that came from having thought very carefully about what was true and what mattered. It is a relief to now be in remission, and I remain focused on recovery. As anyone who has experienced a cancer diagnosis will know, it takes time to adjust to a new normal. Remission. The word she'd been waiting to say. The word that didn't mean cured, didn't mean finished, didn't mean you could put it all down and walk away clean. It meant, right now. Today. The thing is not advancing. Today you are winning. She'd said it publicly. To everyone. And she'd meant every syllable. The thing nobody warns you about, when something like this happens, is that life doesn't stop asking things of you while you're in the middle of it. The children still needed reading to. George still needed someone to look at his homework with the right kind of attention. Charlotte still needed someone who understood that she processed things by going quiet, not by talking about them, and who would sit with her in the quiet without pressing. Louis still needed someone to attempt the dragon voice badly enough that he'd double over laughing. William still needed her. That had been the most surprising part. She had braced herself to need him, that had been obvious, inevitable, and she'd had to practice accepting help in a way she hadn't had to since she was very young. But, his needing her. The way he'd come to find her at the kitchen table, not just to give her company but because being in the same room as her helped him too. That had been something she hadn't expected to be given. She'd turned 42 in the middle of all of it. Quietly. No grand celebration. The kind of birthday that is simply a day when people you love are near you and the toast is slightly burned and outside the kitchen window the garden is green and unremarkable and miraculous. On World Cancer Day 2026, she recorded a message. She sat in a room with good light and she looked directly at the camera and she said what she'd learned to mean: cancer touches so many lives. Not only patients, but the families and friends and caregivers who walk beside them. As anyone who has experienced this journey will know, it's not linear. Not linear. Two words doing the work of 1,000. Not linear meant, you don't go from sick to well in a straight line. It meant, some mornings you wake up and you're fine, and some mornings the weight of what happened is still right there, undiminished. It meant the body takes longer to believe it's safe than the mind does. It meant that the children had watched something happen to their mother and that watching had changed them in ways that were still resolving. It meant she was still learning, every day, how to live inside what had happened. Kensington Palace, in releasing the latest details about her condition and her continued recovery, issued the kind of careful statement they always issued. The princess remains in remission and is focused on her return to royal duties. The princess and the Prince of Wales are grateful for the continued support of the public. True. Correct. Entirely insufficient. What the statement couldn't hold was the specific texture of who she'd become. She was different. Not lesser, different. She moved through rooms differently now, with something she hadn't had before. Not gravity. Gravity had always been there, part of the architecture of who she was. Something else. The particular knowledge of someone who has been required to understand, at a cellular level, that the life they are living is not guaranteed. She looked at George and Charlotte and Louis with that knowledge, and it was the heaviest and most clarifying thing she'd ever felt. She looked at William across rooms at official engagements, both of them in the right clothes, playing the right roles, performing the continuity and dignity and calm that the institution required, and he would catch her eye for just a moment. A fraction of a second. And, in that fraction was everything. The kitchen table. The burned toast. The dragon voice she still couldn't do right. The 13 days of ceiling tiles at the London clinic. The weight of his hand on hers when the doctor said the word. The garden, in the morning, when she can make herself stop thinking. The green. The unremarkable, miraculous green. She is, by every account that matters, doing well. She is doing the hardest kind of well, the kind that costs something, that requires daily work, that does not announce itself in press releases but shows up in small ordinary ways. In a woman who walks back into the hospital where she was treated and sits with someone frightened and says, "It's really tough, I know, here's what helped me." In a mother who reads to her children in the evenings in voices that are not quite right for the characters and is laughed at for it and laughs back. In a wife who is found at the kitchen table in the dark and doesn't have to say what she's thinking because the person who finds her already knows. That is what recovery looks like, from the inside. Not linear. Not finished. But hers.